Alright, I'm going to stick the leatherettes back on the camera now. Now when you go to put the leatherettes back on, they do have an upper and a lower direction. Don't put the leatherette on upside down so that the camera looks like that when it should look like that when you're holding it. Make sure you've got it the right way up. You'll notice that there are 3 stripes embossed on the upper part of the leatherette. There are matching 3 stripes embossed on the leatherette on the front of the camera. Make sure they go to the top. Otherwise, you'll have them on the wrong sides of the camera and you won't like it when you fit the front back. So I'll just glue these back into place. I'll start with the back. Apply your adhesive to the leatherette, not the camera body. This stuff that I'm using here is called ADOS F2. It's available here in New Zealand. I've got no idea what your local equivalent would be. It's a yellowish adhesive. It's not suitable for PVC. It's used for gluing leather. It'll glue rubber, and you can glue wood with it. You can glue cloth with it. I've used it in all sorts of applications and all sorts of trades. The solvent in it is not especially vicious. It has little MEK content, which is good. It means it doesn't melt leatherettes generally. I've put a little bit much on here, so I'm scraping off the excess. Going to make sure you've got it coverage all the way to the edges. And no lumps and bumps. Right, that'll do me. Let's bring the camera body back in here and get this on, making sure I've got it the right way up. Get it centered into the between the ridges on the back here and all the way around to the hinge at one end and against this trim at the other end. Making sure it's centered. While the adhesive's soft, it'll just rub away from those edges where it's squeezed out, but I can just take that off with a bit of naphtha afterwards anyway. Right, so I just want to make sure it's all moulded down firmly. Yeah, most of my Zeiss bumps will probably go away at this stage, but where they don't, I'm just going to make sure that leatherette's pressed down firmly at that point. Don't overdo it, because if you press down too hard you'll emboss the leatherette with a new pattern, which was not what I'd had originally. It's pretty good. I don't think I'm going to have to do anything special to that leatherette. I thought I might have to warm it up with a hairdryer to get the bumps to mould down flat, but to be honest, that's looking pretty good to me. So I don't think I'm going to need to do anything special with that. I think we can about call that done. This was the edge that was a little bit bumpy, and that leatherette was cracked there, I can tell, because the adhesive squeezed out through it at that point. But that's a vast improvement. Right, well, I'll do the leatherettes for the front now in the same way, and then I can start assembling the camera body after that. Inevitably, when you're using adhesive, the stuff will get spread all over the place. That's just fairly normal. You have to be very careful with your choice of adhesive. Some of them, the solvents in them will damage leatherettes. It will soften that plastic up, and the embossing, the whole pattern will go basically. It'll try and turn back into the primordial blob that it came from. I'm sticking to it now. Let's put another drop on there. No, that's just not quite enough in the right place. Trying to make sure I get it spread right to the corners and the edges there. That looks good. Okay, which piece have I got? Right, well I can see that the 3 lines are up, and this is the top of the camera here, so I know it goes at this end. It'll go right against that edge of the moulding there and tuck down in against the hinge at the other end. And I've got to make sure it's centered top and bottom, because the chrome trim comes over here and just comes up to it. So I want that just centered nicely. And make sure it's not above that moulded edge of the body right there. I'll just take a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud. Just wipe along that edge. Just to remove anything that was there. I'll wipe along that hinge line. Oh, I thought that was glue squeeze out there, but it's not. It's where the paint is. There's been corrosion under that paint, or a chip in the paint there. Alright, that looks good. I'll get this last piece on and then I'm ready to go. Spreading the adhesive, it's a very easy task when you're using a toothpick like this. It's always a challenge to get enough adhesive on there and not too much. Make sure I've got good cover to the edges. Of course this end is the only end left, so I know that this is the right leatherette. In this case it goes right up to that trim there, right up to that chrome trim. And then I've just got to make sure it's centered. It does not come up to that line on the body. That's as far as the leatherette goes. Now why they did that, I've got no idea. It would make much more sense for that to continue all the way to the edge, but presumably they didn't, or they obviously didn't need to in order to cover the camera, because that part would be hidden, and I presume that it made much easier for them when they're cutting the leatherette. They probably got a better cut out of the width of a sheet, something along those lines, if they didn't have leatherette being used in areas where they didn't absolutely need it. That's looking good. Right, well that's it for the leatherettes back on the body. That wasn't too stressful, and I can start putting things back together. That's good. I'm just going to clean up this top cover now, because all the other parts I've got cleaned in the ultrasonic cleaner. I went through one round in the insolvent, which is a grease and wax remover, something that's designed for painters to use to wipe down surfaces prior to painting. And then I put them through hot domestic detergent and one with ammonia. It's called Handy Andy, but whatever market you live in, they probably have something of a similar nature. I'll just remove the top cover here, strip this lot down. I don't need to remove the glass from the finder because you can get to both sides of that glass easily. It's not a complicated finder, simple piece. Glass lens at the back, glass lens at the front, easy to clean. For the top cover I want to clean with a bit of naphtha. You can see the grime that's got there underneath that accessory shoe. The chrome here is generally in good condition. This end, of course, is where the frame counter sits. Usually there's grime around the bottom edge of the top cover where it sits down into the chrome trim on the body casting. Usually that's a bit grimy, just because dust and so forth settles down into that crack, absorbs any passing moisture, and it just becomes a breeding ground for all manner of nasty things. It's quite hard to get that chrome to shine. You have oils on the surface which just don't want to clean away completely. That looks good. I'll clean the glass surfaces of the viewfinder. I'm just using some normal domestic glass cleaner. Usually you're best to clean the outside surfaces first, because you can more easily inspect those as you clean them. And then I'll follow that up by cleaning the inside surfaces, which are not so easy to see. The glass in this case is pretty clean. Sometimes they'll be quite grimy. If they're particularly bad, you could remove those two screws, lift out that front glass completely to clean it separately. In this case, it's not bad at all. It's very good. And the eyepiece lens at the back, the access there is through that small rectangular opening. If you swirl it backwards and forwards through there, you'll get reasonable coverage. You'll certainly get reasonable coverage over all the centre part of that lens, which is the bit you can actually see through. That looks good. So I've got that as clean as I need it to be. Let's have a look at the frame counter here. These are the components. I'll just clean these quickly with a bit of naphtha. Everything here is likewise very clean as these things go. the later Retinettes, this was all one piece. This piece here would be all one piece in the later Retinettes. This is not plastic, this appears to be anodized aluminium. Right, now to the assembly. Okay, so let's have a quick look at this. We're interested in number one. That's this frame. There's nothing here to lock there's no end of film lock on this camera, so we don't need to worry about which way round the number disc sits in that piece. I'll need a smear of synthetic grease on that wavy washer. And I'll fit the top cover. Now that's it'll fit on there. I'll get that fitted neatly into its position. This piece drops in there. And there's the retaining screw. Now there's a shoulder on that screw that this spring is supposed to revolve around, so you may need to manipulate this until it drops into place. That's better. I'll do that screw up. Yeah, that's moving nicely. That's a nice positive click, so that's all good. Now the accessory shoe. Quickly clean this. And the 3 screws, we'll clean the heads of those once it's all in place. Get all 3 screws in before you tighten them up, because otherwise you'll likely find getting the last screw in place is awkward. Holes are never aligned as well as they might be. And that is my top cover, all clean, ready to go back on the camera when I get to that stage, which is not yet. Right, let the reassembly commence. Start by putting the bush back in the body. That's the bush that supports the end of your film cassette. The tripod socket can go in there. There are 3 screws that hold that in place. With the 3 screws fitted, I can now tighten those up. That's the tripod socket. Now the advantage of doing that is I can now bang this down on the bench. It won't hit the button that would release the back, which will otherwise annoy me immensely. So, the rewind shaft. I'll apply some synthetic grease to the bush. Put the shaft in place. And that's held in with 2 screws. Do those 2 screws up tight. I think our release lever can go on next. Here's the release lever and its spring. Now I had a lot of trouble getting that spring off. Let's hope that it'll go back on without too much of a fight. Can you see anything? Only just. Certainly wanting to spring away on me. A little hook at the end of it, I need to get that underneath that arm. And the loop seated over the stud. But it does not want to go. That's it. It's making sure that spring is seated neatly around that boss. That's all good. I'll take some molybdenum paste. You could use something else, but I've got this, so I'm going to use it. And that comes up through the body casting here. This on the casting is where the lock lever would run if there was a lock lever. There's no lock lever in this camera. It's the same casting basically as was used for the retinas. I'll drop that down. Be careful of that spring. Try not to get it caught on the edge of the body as you press this down into place. Otherwise you'll end up bending it and then it'll cause you grief. Right, well that's good. That's in place. I'm supporting that with my finger from underneath. I'll put its return spring on the top and the screw. The screw's an adjustment screw. You can adjust the position of that so that the shutter releases at the same point in the travel of the shutter release that the film advance mechanism is released to allow you to wind on for the next shot. And ideally those 2 actions happen at the same point. So I've got that screwed down, so that's under spring tension. And we'll get its final position sorted out when I get to that point. So let's get the take-up spool in place. The plain end, the round hole, that's the one that the bush goes into. Put the bush in there, open the back of the camera, drop it into place, close the back of the camera, that'll keep that there while I'm working. This, I need to lubricate this shaft here where the shaft runs through this bush, and lubricate the spring. I'll do that with graphite grease. The cam surfaces here I will lubricate with synthetic grease. At first the graphite grease, which is the messy bit. But I like this stuff. It has a nice tackiness to it. It stays on that shaft. It gets between the bush and the shaft and stays there. That's good. I'll rub some into the spring for good measure, just so that the coils of the spring ride over each other smoothly. That's very good. Some synthetic grease on those cam surfaces. That's where the release lever runs. And it's arranged so that you cannot inch the film advance. The film advance lever needs to be swung a complete stroke before it will return to the rest position. Alright, I'm going to drop this in. And I know from experience it goes right there. 3 screws. This is where the lock lever would go if the camera had a lock lever. The Retina, this was the Retinette 1, or a variant of the Retinette 1. The Retinette 2 and the Retinette 2B did have lock levers, like a Retina camera. Get the 3 screws fitted, then I can tighten them up. That's that part. The clutch assembly I need to lubricate next, and again I'm going to use the graphite grease to do this. Right, assembling this clutch, I'm going to use the graphite grease again. Okay, taking this, get that little tab seated into that groove. Taking a pair of crimp lug pliers, I can just hold that in, keeping that tab in the groove, and rotate this, pulling the spring in as it goes. Put the top section over it, press down. There is my clutch assembled, ready to go. So I'll drop that in at the top. It engages with the notches on the top of the take-up spool. And I've got the bush here for the film advance shaft, so just force a bit of grease in there, run some through the centre, drop this into place, just rotate the take up spool with my thumb just so that the gear engages. Here we have a single screw here at the back. At the front we have the small standoff, plain side up, countersunk side down. This small pawl, and this shoulder screw. I just put a wipe of synthetic grease around the top of that so that the pawl can move freely. Get that lined up with the hole, and that screw down. check that the pawl can move. Tighten that screw up. Tighten that screw up. Now there's a spring goes on that pawl. To keep it in contact with the gear. See, that acts to push that pawl towards the centre. Okay, well that'll do for the bottom at the moment. I'll see if I can get the this. I think we want our sprocket shaft in there first, next, and the latch lever. The latch lever for our rewind button.